Hi, I'm Dr. Kyla, paediatric dietitian, fussy eating specialist, and mum of two. I'm the founder of the online Mealtimes memberships that help parents just like you experience a confident and guilt-free way of feeding children. I'm also a business owner, a hot cross bun lover, and my superpower is finding things that you cannot live without. In this podcast, I'm talking about feeding your family, along with a random selection of topics that tickle my fancy. Welcome to Mealtimes with Dr. Kyla.
A trip to the shops, you pack a snack. A doctor's appointment for the kids, a snack. You've got shelf-stable snacks in the nappy bag at all times. The beach bag's got a couple of muesli bars at the bottom just in case. You get to the park early in the morning and the kids want a snack before they even start playing, even though you just had brekkie. Has our snack culture gone a bit crazy? I'm Dr. Kyla. Welcome back to the Mealtimes with Dr. Kyla podcast. It is lovely to have you. Today I am interested in unpacking snack culture, why we're obsessed about snacks, but also why they're really important for kids. So this episode it was prompted by a couple of messages that I was sent on Instagram, forwarding a Q&A box from a really well-known psychotherapist, Jess from Nurtured First, and she was kind of getting people to share their unpopular opinions and commenting on them. And the unpopular opinion that was shared in this experience was, are we doing kids a huge disservice by adopting a snack culture? And Jess, as a psychotherapist, did a really wonderful job of staying in her lane, of kind of wondering about this, but saying, I wonder if actually a dietitian really needs to comment here. And so a few people sent it to me, and I thought, this is such a great topic. I really want to dive into this. So, are we doing our children a disservice by obsessing about snacks? As always, I'm never going to give you a black and white answer because I think there is so much nuance to this topic. So let's talk about, firstly, the importance of snacks for kids. So why are snacks a big part of childhood? If you think about your child at home, the size of their tummy is about the size of their fist. So if you're thinking about a baby, a toddler, early school age child, they are really small fists. It does not take a lot of food to fill up that tummy. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that one of the biggest things I harp on and on about is listening to your tummy, really trusting your child to listen to their body and know when they've had enough to be satisfied. So if you've got a small child with a small fist-sized tummy, they are likely to have a bit to eat and really be done after not very long at all. They don't necessarily need a huge amount to sustain them. The tricky thing is that amount of food does empty out of the tummy and they do get hungry again, relatively soon. And so one of the things that snacks do really well is they help to bridge the gaps between meals. It is a really long time to wait between breakfast and lunch for a small growing toddler. Ideally, we want to be feeding our kids every 2 to 3 hours, and that often looks something like a meal, a snack, a meal, a snack, a meal, and a snack if needed. And so what I really like to think about snacks as being is just another chance in the day to fill up your tummy, listen to it, and then move on with the day. That is a really important part of getting enough for growth, of being able to really stay in touch with your hunger and fullness signals without being overwhelmed by hunger, without getting so ravenous by the time that you get to lunch that you're completely dysregulated. And to be fair, this applies to a lot of adults too. I know absolutely I cannot make it through to lunchtime without getting absolutely overly hungry to the point that I'm kind of getting a snack while I'm making my lunch. And that absolutely is one of my examples of where snack culture gets tricky, which we'll get to in a sec. So snacking is a big part of toddlerhood. In toddler meal times, we have a snack gallery of ideas for snacks, what that might look like. There are so many snack recipes. We've got a guide to choosing, pre-packaged snacks from the supermarket. It absolutely is an important part of childhood. But here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky. This question referenced snack culture, and to me, the idea of snack culture is like just really, being obsessed by snacks, thinking about snacks a lot, talking about snacks. But when I actually looked it up, which was kind of interesting, snack culture is a modern lifestyle trend where grazing, small meals, and on-the-go eating replaces traditional structured dining. And I think when we talk about snacks like this, kind of getting in the way or replacing meals, is where things can start to get a little bit tricky for our young kids. We know that there are so many snacks marketed to children. The snack aisles are out of control, crazy. It is really hard to know what is a good snack, what's a problematic snack, are there things that we should be buying? And then where do they fit in our kind of eating patterns? So in terms of, meals, where are they fitting? What I don't want is that snack foods start to replace opportunities to sit down and share food together. So I don't want snacks to be getting in the way of meals. I really want snacks to support meals. And so ideally, we want kids and adults to come to a meal or come to a snack with an appetite. So they're not ravenous, but they're not full. They've got a drive, an internal drive to want to eat something at that time. And that 2 to 3 hour kind of marker tends to be a good guide. There's enough time to digest what you had at the previous eating opportunity, and then you've got a bit of an appetite for the next time that you're going to eat. I don't know that we have to be obsessive about whether it's a meal or whether it's a snack or what we call it. I think for young kids, a lot of the foods that we incorporate at a snack could absolutely be part of a meal as well. And so maybe that's another one of the tricky things that kind of crops up. If snacks mean snack foods from the snack food aisle, that is a really tricky one to build into your family from a cost perspective, from a nutrition perspective. There's absolutely room for those foods, but it doesn't mean that every snack has to come out of a box or it has to be kind of a really appealing food for a child. And so if you've got, I'm thinking particularly of our lovely 3-year-olds who are very clear in what they do and don't want and are demanding particular things or helping themselves from the cupboard. That starts to get a little bit tricky when they're really wanting one particular food and we're trying to find a balance between kind of what we're buying from the supermarket or those packaged foods and how they fit into our lifestyles, and then what else we can offer at the time that's accepted for them. So that does become a bit of a challenge if there's become a pattern, I guess, of those foods being something that is highly desirable to a young child. So I do think there's also a bit of a tricky space in Snackland when it does become an association that when we get to somebody's house, we must eat something because that's what we do. When we get to the park, we have something to eat, even though we've just eaten. And so that I think is a more blurry line. I am less bothered about that when it's an occasional thing. I do think, though, if there's a pattern where all of a sudden you've got 9 eating opportunities every day because you're going somewhere, meeting somebody, and there seems to be an accompanying snack at each event, that can get in the way, particularly of this appetite, this natural, pattern of eating regularly, but not all the time. And when we get into this kind of pattern of eating for the sake of it, that does start to get in the way of being able to listen to your tummy. And that is one of the things I will always come back to. Are we supporting our kids to listen to their body? And kind of regular snacking just for the fun of it can absolutely get in the way of that. Now, always easier, theoretically to discuss these things. But the question is, do we need to take a snack when we go to the shops? Do we need to take a snack if you're going to the doctor? Do we need to take a snack? And I think there are times when absolutely we do. Like, you will not see me on a plane without snacks for my children. Absolutely, I'm using them as an activity in that moment. Am I using it as an activity when we just go to the park after school? I would say no. If we've already had, something to eat within that kind of normal time frame that I'd be expecting at 2 to 3 hours, then I wouldn't be taking more food just in case they get hungry. And this is the kind of, where we've got to find our way. And the last kind of one where it gets tricky and potentially sticky is to do with oral health. So this is actually a member question that came up in Toddler Meal Times, and this mum had taken her 3 kids to the dentist, and the dentist had said to her on the way out, you really need to limit their intake to only 3 meals a day absolutely no snacking because it's really bad for your teeth. She jumped into the member group and asked this question because she was like, this sounds a bit not right to me, but I don't know what to do. I don't obviously don't want to mess up my kids' teeth, but also like how are we supposed to manage, daily life? What about my kid at recess? Like, is she not allowed to eat anything because it's bad for her teeth? So this is an example of a health professional who's really not necessarily staying within their scope, and is starting to make kind of dietary recommendations. Now, I also want to be conscious of my role here when I'm going to also talk about teeth in response to this. But really, the kind of accepted guidance between, professionals around nutrition and professionals around oral health is that absolutely frequent grazing, eating all the time, and not giving our teeth a break from having food on it can absolutely be a problem for our teeth. So we know that there's bacteria in our mouths, they can grow on teeth, and the sugar that we have in food can make acid, which causes damage and tooth decay. So if we've always got food in our mouth, we're eating all the time, then yes, it absolutely can be a problem from an oral health point of view. But I think this is very different to saying absolutely no snacking, only 3 meals a day. That is not sustainable for young kids. It is really hard to get enough into a child, for them to eat enough to be full, to grow, if they're only having just the set 3 meals a day. So, again, it's about finding this balance, and I think it's really helpful to think about, why are we so anxious about snacks? Like, why is there something in your car that you could pull out in an emergency? What is the emergency that we are all kind of preparing for? So I do think there's an evolutionary role to snacking. We are, biologically driven to want to feed and nourish our offspring. And essentially because they'll die if we don't. And so there is something within us, a throwback to really times of feast and famine, where if there wasn't enough food, you had to really search and find and have something available so that your children could live. So there is that kind of part of us, our primal brain coursing through us, but it does kind of feed this fear of hunger. A lot of people feel really uncomfortable by their child saying, I'm hungry, and them not giving them food at that exact moment. And it's interesting to think what that brings up for you. If your child tells you they're hungry, can you respond in different ways? If it's time for eating, can you be, yeah, it's pretty much morning tea time. We'll have something in a sec. Or does that kind of request for food really trigger some kind of fear or anxiety in you? And what is that about? It's really interesting to kind of unpack that. But I know definitely for myself at times as a parent, but also for a lot of the parents that I work with, this idea of not providing food when a child tells you that they're hungry feels just really uncomfortable or neglectful or something. So I really want to touch on, why is hunger an important thing? So hunger is that natural drive to want to eat. And if we graze all day long, we have a nibble here, a nibble there, you keep playing, a bit of food here, a bit of food here, you really start to lose touch with that hunger. It starts to kind of you eat enough just to get by, and then you get a little bit hungry, have just enough to get by. You really don't get a chance to sit, pay attention, fill up that tummy, and then give it a chance to empty. And so hunger is actually a really important part of meal times. Coming with an appetite, a drive to eat, is something we actually want to nourish. And it is very reasonable to allow that 2 to 3 hour gap between each eating opportunity. Sometimes people find it's helpful to have a phrase that they might say, it's not eating time yet, we'll have eating time soon. That means that you can get to that next meal. If you've got a toddler particularly who is eating, every half an hour, every 20 minutes, a nibble here, there's food out, for them to come and graze on. It might be a much more gradual process, and we can kind of gradually work towards that 2 to 3 hours. But I do think supporting hunger is helpful, and not having snacks available at all times is quite a positive thing. Which brings me to kind of the last point, why we're so anxious about having food available, is I think we use it from a boredom prevention point of view, or really to kind of keep meltdowns at bay. And I absolutely understand that. If you're taking your child to a wedding and you need them to not be screaming during the ceremony, then absolutely you should be taking a snack with you to give them in that moment. But the question is, how often does that start to creep into your routine? Is there snacks for absolutely every event? One of the things I always found a little bit challenging when we did toddler activities, we would be at a dance class or a music class, and these classes are, maybe 45 minutes long, and there are children eating in the class. And I think that's often an example of where snacks have kind of gone too far because we're in a toddler class, kids are going to be crying or yelling, it's noisy anyway. But there's a toddler kind of crawling through the tunnel with a banana, smearing it everywhere, or they're eating something on the go, which really worries me from a choking point of view. Like if we can't get through a 45-minute dance class without a snack, I think that does speak to a bigger kind of difficulty or challenge there around like, is this to prevent them getting upset? Is it because you're really worried that they haven't had enough to eat? Are they getting bored, which you would hope not in a 45-minute class? But it does really raise the question, why does it need to be something that they have while they're doing something else? And I certainly, zero judgment. There are times when you need to use whatever it is in your toolbox to keep your child calm in that moment. But I do wonder like how often that might be happening and whether it does start to impact their appetite or impact their desire for eating at a later time. So let's wrap up with kind of some tips. This was really another episode to make you think, to make me think, to reflect on some of these things. The ones I really want you to take away is I like to think of snacks and meals as having a 2 to 3 hour gap between them. So definitely doesn't need to be rigid or on the hour, but really a flow in the day that's reasonably predictable, that there isn't always a snack available, but there are regular times for eating. I find it useful, particularly in early childhood, to be thinking about everything as a mini meal. So rather than kind of deciding it's a meal or a snack, we're really thinking about those core foods that fit into breakfast or morning tea or lunch or afternoon tea or dinner. And it doesn't need to be a particular food, but I do like to think of snacks including 2 food groups. So as a kind of minimum. So that might be a glass of milk and a piece of fruit. So a dairy and a fruit. It might be peanut butter and crackers, which includes a protein and a grain. It might be something like French toast, including a grain and a protein. It might be a yogurt and a crumpet, again, a grain and a protein. Adding fruit and veggies in there obviously is also really beneficial at any point, even if it's a really teeny tiny, a yogurt, a crumpet and a pea. If your child is still getting used to vegetables, that's totally okay. But that idea of a mini meal tends to kind of serve you better in your head, the narrative that you're kind of working through the day. A mini meal can absolutely be more useful than a snack. So that brings me to the end. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Are you a victim of snack culture? Do you find it really hard to say no if your child is telling you that they're hungry? Have you got, years old muesli bars in your bag somewhere? I'm interested to hear from you. I would love you to get in touch. And as always, my memberships are open. If you have any challenges or any questions with feeding your kids, I would love to be the one to help you. So you can check that out at mealtimes.com.au. Thanks for being here today. Bye.
A huge thanks for tuning in and listening to my podcast. This is all brand new for me, so I'd love to hear your feedback. Give me a review or send me a DM. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And above all, I'd really love you to hit that subscribe button to keep listening. Thanks.